for having me. Very happy to do this. Every week for game developers, I host, it's called an Ask Me Anything, but it's really just a basic question and answer period on reddit.com. And this week I'm going to be doing this and kind of promoting it through that instead. So I'll try to cover the most popular questions I get every week, keeping in mind these are usually independent game developers, kind of middle tier, not AAA studios or things like that. But the law applies to you just as if you were. So we'll try to, tackle the things that I get almost every single week and go from there. And if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the little question box there, and we'll take care of basically all that. So just to jump right into it, I'm going to kind of talk about this as if there's lawyers watching and game developers as well, because I know there are going to be a few of each at least. So it's important to know not only yourself as a game developer, but also who your client is if you're an attorney working with one. Nowadays, it's easy for anyone to become a game developer. You can download an application and get working and learn programming yourself basically overnight. That means these game developers aren't the stereotypical anti-lawyer people. These are the people who view themselves as hobbyists, not realizing that they're surrounding themselves in a very controlled industry by a lot of different laws. So they're not, as I said, anti-lawyer. They're more, they don't think about a lawyer at any point. That's what I've been trying to do with these AMAs with Reddit and spreading it around to other people. Just the little guys who gets beat up most commonly in this industry, and unfortunately it's because they don't do any legal preparation. They don't know how the legal landscape works. They don't understand any of the laws. It's not their job to. They just don't prepare. They go to an accountant, but they never think to go to a lawyer. And hopefully that's changing as, unfortunately, more and more people are being kind of devastated by, life-ruining settlements or judgments, and we're trying to prevent that from being an everyday occurrence. On top of that, there's the old joke that the cop has to tell you he's a cop, and all the drug dealers believe that, even though it's clearly not true. There's a million of those equivalents in video game developing, which we'll try to go through most of them. They range from, I'm not charging for my game, so I can't possibly be sued for infringement, which is ridiculous, to, thinking that they have fair use for everything, to thinking they need a patent, which, again, we'll go over, is just completely not in the realm of reality for most of these. And then finally, it's important to know, as I said earlier, you're not, EA and you're not Bethesda, but the law applies to you as if you are. These little guys go to war with, Blizzard, for example, daily. Not to knock Blizzard, but to say that, if you create a little app on the App Store and you have a guy that looks like a Space Marine, it doesn't matter if that app's free. It doesn't matter if you don't monetize it at all. It doesn't matter if it was a side project you made in your garage with a couple buddies to just enjoy yourselves with. You're as liable as if you made $1 million for that game, potentially. So it's important to keep all that in mind, and it's a good place to kind of start the mentality of where you need to be. And since I spoke mostly about intellectual property, we'll jump right into that. One of the most common questions I get is this title, which is obviously a bit of a joke. Sorry, I'm much funnier normally. It's early. Can I copyright my patent? They ask that non-jokingly commonly, or can I trademark my patent, or things like that. Copyright, patent, and trademarks are three very different things. They all fall under the umbrella of intellectual property, so we'll kind of quickly go through the three that are less important, still important, but less important, and then we'll tackle trademarks, which is kind of the end-all, be-all of video game intellectual property right now. First and foremost are copyrights. They are basically free. When you create one, when you draw a scribble on a chalkboard, you have a copyright on that image. You can register a copyright. You need to register a copyright, which is, ranges from, depending on what lawyer you're working with, but from $100 to a few $100s. It's substantially cheaper than any other kind of intellectual property. And the registration process basically just says, here's, indisputable proof that this is the date I registered it, this is the date of creation, and I can sue anybody who infringes on this. The test for copyright infringement is substantially similar. That means if you make Mario but color him blue, or you change his hat a little bit. Or a popular example is all the Flappy Bird clones in the App Store where they just gave Flappy Bird a hat or they changed his eyes a little bit. Those are all substantially similar. That's where I can look at that picture and immediately know the source. I know you copied it, and it's infringement, absolutely. The follow-up question I then get usually is, well, how are there so many clones on the App Store? How are there so many Flappy Bird, knockoffs? It's because it's up to the rights holder to go after the person stealing their ideas. They can't. You can't. Apple's not going to go police the App Store for you. The Copyright Office isn't going to. It's absolutely up to you as the right holder to look through the App Store, look through Google, and find people that are stealing your property, stealing your ideas, and go after them. And I just had a comment that Canadian registration is only about $50 in Canada for the copyright. In America, I believe it's only $35 right now, ranging to $55. The Copyright Office and Trademark Office actually just changed all their fee schedules. But an attorney will probably only charge for a half hour of his time to do a copyright for you. And honestly, it's one of the few things where I'd say you can just do it yourself. You go to the Copyright Office website. It's all online. You upload your stuff, and it's pretty simple. The caveat or trick with that is that video games, there's a lot of different schools of thought by attorneys on which, whether they should be visual works or literary works, which is not worth getting into right now, but it's basically safest to file under both, so it doubles your fees. Going forward on that, then, we have patents. Patents are basically a way to protect an invention. Copyrights are more for the art, the script, the overall project. Patents would be if you have a new mechanic that is protectable or a new, basically, invention. They almost do not exist in video games. It's incredibly hard to get a patent in software right now, even harder to get in video games. There are some that you will read about or you'll hear about, or hopefully, not, but that some people get attacked over with things like the look and feel of Tetris or other areas like that. But if you're an independent developer, you're a mid-level developer, patents are almost certainly not something you're going to concern yourself with. They are very expensive to register, and they're even more expensive to enforce if something happens with it. So they're just usually outside of reality for most developers. Trade secrets are basically what a non-disclosure agreement would cover. It's if you work at, for example, Google or Blizzard, and then you take all their processes or, kind of how they run things, and then you go and put that all in your own business to make your own product more successful, your own company better. Those are trade secrets. You can't steal those, but again, those are something that most indies and most mid-level guys just don't have to worry about. Trademarks, however, is absolutely the end-all be-all of intellectual property in video games right now. I actually got into video games legally over the Candy Crush debacle that was happening about this time last year. Basically, King, who owns Candy Crush, said they owned the word candy and saga. They filed 2 separate registrations for that. God knows how, but the USPTO allowed those to go through. It was under a foreign filing, but still. And then they started going after these kind of mom-and-pop shops that were using words like candy or saga in their titles, sending out a bunch of cease and desists and making a lot of bad press for themselves. Most famously, they went after Banner Saga. They said Banner Saga can't use the word saga, even though saga is quite literally a Norse word for epic, and Banner Saga is a Viking role-playing game. Candy Crush felt they owned Saga more than them. The little match 3 nonsense game made by, in my opinion, not very good people. And I can use that because that saves me from defamation suits, I think. So the answer there was if these other companies had successful trademarks, they would have been fine. Instead, you see it more and more now where these bigger companies are sending out cease and desist for very small infractions to indie developers or mid-level developers, saying that A, they have to change their name. It used to be just a cease and desist saying change your name, take it down, and that's that. Now more and more we're seeing change your name and give us $15,000. That can normally be negotiated down, but in exchange they want something called a consent judgment. The consent judgment basically says, yes, we admitted we're infringing, and it builds up terrible case law that For example, I mean, just to move down the list a little bit, for example, these casinos are making fantasy-themed slot machines or fantasy-themed or sci-fi themed slot machines, and they're saying they own all these words like, basically space combat. They'll say they own, and they'll sue this little small guy who can't afford to fight it, and then they'll get a consent judgment saying that yes, we have a ruling saying that now we own space combat, and it's creating a lot of bad law. It's creating a lot of terrible precedent, and it's an unfortunate bullying system going on right now that can be prevented by proper trademark registration or working with an attorney to do that. I know trademarks are not cheap. They'll run you anywhere from $750 to probably $3,500 depending on who you work with. But that's what kind of makes the difference between a game developer and a hobbyist. If you really want to be a developer, you want to start a studio, you have to understand that studio has startup costs, and you have to understand that this isn't playing around with your friends in the garage anymore. This is the real time, and if you want to sell a product or even not sell a product, just put up a free app and maybe hopefully down the road monetize it or get some ad revenue or just even build your company name. If you're infringing on something, you're liable for a lot of money. And honestly, we're lucky it's $15,000 and that they're willing to go down on it, because they could probably get you for a lot more if they actually have all these judgments and rulings that you're infringing on their IP and you're causing them damages by consumer confusion. The other thing to keep in mind is that since everyone can make an app nowadays, the mobile market's completely flooded, and there's almost always going to be a Dark Tower game before your Dark Tower game, or whatever name that you fall in love with. The earlier you try to trademark that name, the more likely you are to get to use it, because there are hundreds of apps coming out every day. They each have a name, and those names are usually pretty simple, so they're found easier in searches. They're found easier in the plethora of other ways people find apps. So as early as you can, file a trademark, try to secure that name, because that name is your brand. It's what you put your time, energy, and money into. It's not something you want to mess around with. No one wants to change. The more you can do, the better. There is no you've done enough. There never is. You should look at your name in different languages. You should try to see if there's parody names of something that you thought was a cool name. And be, quote unquote, riding the coattails of their success, which is what copyright protects against. A transformative work is when you might have been inspired by Jason, which is fine. Everybody's inspired by everything. There's no original ideas anymore, as they say. The transformative work means, you took that monster and you changed a lot about him. You changed what his mask looked like. Now he hunts people in a suburban neighborhood instead of a camp. He has a different weapon, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have something like Mike Myers from Halloween, which is, a transformative work. That's and not that I know that is, but it's something where it's different enough. And that's kind of the only line. There is no black and white test here. There is no way to know, even your attorney, when you go to him, he's not going to say, yes, absolutely, that's different enough. But he'll know these tests. He'll know the actual factors a judge will use. And that's why it's worth always just, giving a lawyer an hour of your time and going over your game before release to make sure your models are different enough. No one wants the letter from Blizzard. No one wants the letter from anyone else saying, take your app down immediately. We don't care how many users you have. Change the name, change the artwork, and next thing you know, your successful app is gone. And you can put it back up with different stuff, but you've lost your user base at that point. Players usually aren't that loyal. Then whether or not you're charging has nothing to do with anything. Yes, in reality, it is one factor of fair use. If you're not charging, a judge might look at it friendlier, but it doesn't matter because that's still infringing. Your free game, your fan fiction you write, your art you're drawing, it's all infringing. The defenses here are fair use and parity. Fair use and parity, again, that's a defense you use in court. That's not something that prevents you from getting sued. That's something that you're going to have to prove in court, which is incredibly expensive and you can't afford to do. You made a Star Wars parody game, which every week I see a new one on Reddit. If Disney sues you, who now owns Star Wars, you're done. You're not going to go beat Disney's legal team and prove fair use in court because you didn't charge for your app. They don't care. The judge won't care. You're done. And it's unfortunate, but fair use and parity just don't exist for indie developers, at least not in any experience I've had. To prove parity, because a follow-up is always, well, how does Family Guy do it? Parity, one of the biggest factors is whether or not I know it's a parody, meaning I look at this show and I know all Family Guy does is make fun of celebrities and pop culture references, so I expect them to make a parody. I expect them to, use intellectual property that's not theirs in a comedic way. No one expects your indie studio to be doing that. No one expects your mid-level studio to be doing that. I don't care what kind of game you have. You have to reach a certain echelon of success before parody is open to you. In reality, not maybe by the letter of the law, but in reality, yes. And it's absolutely true that you're not there yet. Moving on, and again, I see a couple things pop up, but feel free to ask questions if you want. If I'm moving too quickly over something or I'm not covering something you kind of want me to elaborate on. I'm not used to rambling when I do this. I usually type everything out, so this is a different experience. Another big thing everyone does is hire a freelancer. Unfortunately, again, at the indie tier or the mid-level tier, this is usually done finding each other on a forum or through email. There's never a contract used. There's never a formal agreement. It's, hey, would you like to come be partners on this? And you do the art, I'll do the programming. It'll be great. The problem with that is now you've just created basically a partnership where you each own half. What if this guy disappears? What if he does bad work? What if he actually does all the artwork and now he says he owns the entire game, which again is absolutely possible. You absolutely need a contract with everyone you're working with, especially freelancers. The biggest reason why is if you hire a freelancer, you pay them 10 grand for your artwork, he does that artwork, and then all of a sudden, I'm sorry, I was reading a question. You pay him for the artwork, and the freelancer still owns everything. He's licensing it to you at that point without an agreement in most states. But in, I believe, 49 of the 50 states, you can pay him. You can say, yes, this is now my artwork. But until you have a signed assignment from that freelancer where it's a work for hire or they're actually assigning it to you afterwards, you don't own anything. You own a license to that, which is revocable, meaning that freelancer can wait till you're successful and say, all right, now give me 50% of your profits, or take your game down. I'm going to sue you for infringement. It's a dangerous game to play because as nice as everyone seems off the bat, things go wrong. It doesn't matter if you're working with your best friends in college or your best friends when you're 40. Things happen. Maybe he falls in love and goes to Ireland, and you now all of a sudden are left with this stuff, and he wants 50% of a game he didn't do anything for. Contract everything out. Set up the appropriate structure so that if something does go wrong, or really when something goes wrong, you're covered for it. And it'll save your friendships, or it'll save your reputation on these different forums or game industries. So it's not negotiable in my mind. It's not a want, it's a need. It's absolutely beyond importance. The next thing is, everyone's saying, hey, come on in and we'll be partners, or hey, I'll give you 30% of the company for doing the artwork since I can't afford to pay you up front. That's dangerous and unnecessary also, because instead of splitting equity, you should be splitting revenue if you're splitting anything. And that's better for both sides usually. The artist doesn't want to own half your company. He doesn't want to be showing up for corporate meetings or worrying about stock vests and everything like that. He wants to do his art and make money for it. So he wants revenue sharing. At the same time, you don't want to lose your company. You want final say on voting rights. You want final say on how your brand and company progresses. So you want full ownership. So instead of giving someone 30% equity, like I see happen all the time, give them 30% revenue, and 30% is high, so whatever you're doing. Try to keep it like that. And I got a couple questions, so I'm just going to check those quick. Is there a site where we can check local laws to see what is owed to the freelancers? That is an excellent question. Your state website will have, unfortunately the answer is the laws you can check. There's a couple different areas to see that, but as far as I know, there's no intelligent, easy-to-use database saying, I live in Utah, what do I have to do with a freelancer here to make sure I own my intellectual property and to make sure he's not an employee and to make sure everything else. I'm sure they are being worked on. I'm sure there's employment lawyers in every state that have that state's kind of rules or that district's rules on where the line is on everything. But, that's an interesting thing to maybe look into, and I'll share the wealth if I find it. But as of now, I don't know anything like that set up. And then I see, so can a game use McDewey's versus McDonald's? If that's referencing something, I'm not aware of it, but no. So McDewey's, again, if you put McDewey's and in your game as a burger place, that's almost certainly going to be McDonald's, especially if you put the golden arches on it. The more I can look at your logo or brand name, the more and see another one, the more infringement is there. It's called, if they're confusingly similar is the test with trademarks. So McDewey's, in my mind, is certainly confusingly similar with McDonald's. And you own the trademark, potentially, if you file properly, you own the trademark on both the name and the logo. So, oh, it is coming to America. I'm an idiot. It's been a while. Right, so what the hell was I just saying? All right, so if you own the logo and the name, meaning you can name your name Bob's Burgers, but if you, well, that's a bad example to show, but let's say you name your burger place Bob's in your game, but there's golden arches behind it. Doesn't matter, you completely change the name, I can still look at that logo and see McDonald's, so that's still infringing. So you have to be careful on both the look of the logo and the actual name in the logo. Both are absolutely just too important to ignore. They're both equally powerful, and it's something that you need to keep in mind. Going back to the freelancers, the most I keep saying the most important because everything's so important, but a very important thing with freelancers is to make sure they're not an employee. Why? Because an employee is owed a lot of different things than a freelancer, and it's a headache a lot of indie developers just don't want. So to make sure they're not, again, as I said a little earlier, every state's going to be different on these tests. There are things that are pretty universal that you should try to do, though. The major ones are make sure you're getting invoiced by this freelancer on preferably their company's letterhead, their company's logo and sheet and name on it. Try to make sure, it's fine if they're working on location, but it's preferred for them to not be working on location. If you require them to be on location, that's going to be heavily towards employee. If you allow them on location to work, that's the middle ground, and preferably to be a true independent contractor, they should be at their own place. They should also be using their own materials. You shouldn't be letting them use a company computer or a company, even a pen. The more they do, the more likely they are your employee and not your contractor. The actual say you have over the project, you as the game developer, is the more say you have, the more likely they are an employee. To say in a freelancer agreement, we're going to be working perpetually on this game and we'll figure it out as we go along. Not okay. You need to be narrowing the scope. You need to be saying, we're hiring you to come up with character concepts for this, this, and this, and that's your project scope right here. If we do anything else, we'll do another contract, and you'll give me a different invoice, and that'll be that. Those are the major ones off the top of my head. And as simple as those all seem, most people don't follow those, and then you start getting into that scary employee territory. Again, if you're in California, God bless you, there's a endless list of additional laws and requirements you have to follow there. But statewide, nationwide, those things are probably going to be good enough usually. Again, consult with an attorney and make sure you're actually following everything to a T. It's very much worth the hour of paying an attorney for an hour to really go through your business and make sure you're following everything. Terms of service. So this is something that is widely ignored or abused in the video game industry when it is, again, it's something that is a necessity if you want to truly be legally safe. The terms of service is going to really give you a lot of liability shields. It's gonna make you, protected in a lot of situations where something could go wrong. And no, because I get asked every week, I don't mean someone's playing your game and walks into a pole and hurts themselves. That's not realistic. That's not what anyone's looking at. I mean, if they download your game and then accidentally get malware from it, or they get hacked by another player, or they buy in-game currency from you and then they feel that they didn't get their money's worth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a trillion different real things that can happen with your game that can make you liable. The terms of service is your best way to say, well, if this happens, we're fine. If this happens, sorry, we make no claims that we're giving you medical advice. It's all, and to be clear, terms of service is it's the thing you click OK to that you usually don't read when you download something from Apple or sign up to a website. With video games, until very recently, it was okay to have something on your website and maybe reference it very quickly in your app saying, or your Steam game or whatever, saying, for further terms, please visit our website. Now there's a recent court decision which kind of put things on its head, and it's only for this area in that jurisdiction, which I actually have to double check. I actually forget which circuit that was in. But it said without a tick box, without me having to click OK, I read this, it's not good enough. That's a huge change to things, and we've gone back with most of my clients and tried to make sure that we can implement that and make sure that somebody is clicking OK, that there is that extra step there, because that's a silly reason to lose a lawsuit, that there wasn't a tick box. But you also need to make sure you have a strong terms of service. Another reason terms of service fails is in court is if people say, oh, Disney has a great terms of service, they have great lawyers, I'll just take theirs. You can't do that because Disney has a lot of different things it's doing than what you're doing. Disney has different, a completely different game. And if you're using a terms of service that's so clearly not for your game, it's going to either be over-encompassing or under-encompassing. And a judge will look at it and say, this is ridiculous, you have no idea what you put up here, we're not going to allow this. Additionally, a terms of service is very important if you have users submitting their own content, whether they're making a map, whether they can make their own costume or their own skin, whatever it is. If a user's making something, or even if a user's allowed to post on your forums, you should have a DMCA takedown registered agent. Most people only know what that is from bad press saying, can you believe what YouTube's doing with these DMCA takedowns, or et cetera, et cetera. What it really is it protects you as the host. So the reason YouTube does it, for to use them as the perfect example, if I upload a scene from Star Wars to YouTube, I've committed infringement. But has YouTube? Well, yes, because YouTube assisted in that infringement. The way YouTube is not liable under American law is that since they're the host here, they're only giving me the ability to do it. They're not liable as long as they have a procedure in place for Disney or someone else, or basically the rights holder, to say this video is infringing, take it down immediately, and we'll figure it out later whether or not it really is. That's where the big complaints are. That's where the populace gets mad, because you are guilty until proven innocent here. Your stuff gets taken down immediately with these takedown notices normally. It's how it has to work for YouTube to remain liability free, and it's what you have to do as a game developer to, if someone makes a skin in the game who looks like Han Solo and Disney says no go, you need to immediately take that down. Now, it's not enough to just say send us an email if you see infringement. You have to really be registered with the government as an agent for notice. Very simple procedure, very easy to do, but it's something that needs to be done. And that's something that would be in your terms of service. Now again, as I said, things like with the tick box and things like judges starting to say, no one's reading this 94-page agreement, what are they agreeing to, will this hold up? The curve in case law is going to absolutely be the simpler the better. No one's doing that yet. LinkedIn has a kind of interesting terms of service if you want to look at that. At least they did last I checked. I don't know if they changed it. But they had kind of a dumbed-down version of every clause, and then the very elaborate legalese version of the clause. The tricky part there is if I'm reading that and agreeing to the dumbed-down version and I'm thinking I understand it, and then there's a lot of other clauses in the legalese part, will that hold up? I don't know. You don't know. None of us know. We'll have to see how a judge looks at it eventually. But for now, it'll be smarter for you and your attorney to try to come up with something simple. And again, this is simple for a terms of service. So don't expect a page-long document. Don't expect like what Mojang used for so long. That was basically a paragraph saying do whatever you want with our stuff, just don't make money off of it. Because then you can see all the explosions that caused down the road. Have a real document. Expect it to be probably 3 to 7 pages long. And don't have the 40-page document. It's unnecessary. It's going to bite you in the ass almost as bad as not having one if something happens. Almost as bad. It's still better to have one. So those are all, again, that's something just very important you should keep in mind. The thing that's always paired with the terms of service is a privacy policy. A privacy policy is just the other link usually on the bottom of the website that you don't read, and it says what they're tracking from you, what is private of yours that they're saying we get to use this. It's obviously growing. More people are tracking more things. If you're a game developer listening to this, I'm sure you track a lot of different metrics, probably even just how long people stay on page 1 before they click continue, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all okay to do, but you have to disclose them. Where the line is right now of what's okay to track and what's not is absolutely blurry. The privacy laws that come down, I feel like the legislators making them don't even understand what they are, and that's not rare in technology, obviously. But the safest thing you can do is disclose everything you tracked, even if you're not using it for anything. There's a famous case where this small, game developer was obliterated over a lawsuit because they were unintentionally, just through bad programming, taking the entire person's contact list. They weren't using it for anything. They weren't sending out an email. They weren't using it for spam. They weren't selling it. But the fact that they took it was enough to bring hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages down upon them, if I'm remembering the judgment correctly. Which, regardless, it's there. It's a real fear. So, again, it doesn't matter if you're being nefarious. It doesn't matter if you're a multi-million-dollar company. If you're tracking user data in any way, even just due to faulty programming, disclose it. Let them know that we are going to look at this, we're going to keep this, that's that, because then they can agree to it. Without agreeing to it, there's no point in, there's no way to protect yourself. So it's very important. And again, this is also something that's going to require a tick box. Luckily, you can kind of combine them. Most games will have them right back to back. You tick both, or the terms of service will link to the privacy policy in it, which is ambiguous whether that's good enough or not, but it's certainly, again, better than nothing. and then again, what metrics are you tracking? It's just important to keep that in mind and really be honest with yourself. Yeah, we are looking at this, this, and this. We are taking their emails. We are planning on trying to keep our company afloat by selling it to third parties. Whatever you're doing, disclose it. Then COPA is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. It is, if your game is even arguably targeted at children 13 or younger, you have a very different set of rules you have to follow. We do not let you track information for someone under 13, and you need to have a lot of different things in your privacy policy saying, you know, if you are under 13, absolutely can't use this. If you are under 13, you need permission of a parent to use this. If you are under 13 and we're aiming at a game under 13, that's fine, you're using this, but make sure we know who you are so we can't even, you're not even allowed to take their email address. You know, how do they make an account then? Well, they need their parents' permission, it needs to be under their name, and it needs to be supervised use, usually, depending. But you cannot track anything from 13 or younger. It's just how it works. There we go. Right, so that's basically the big ones. Everything else is, you know, there's a million different ways to go because there's a million different smaller concerns depending on what your company does. So if you are, you know, one of the people in the chat room right now, which I see there's quite a few of you, feel free to give me the genre you do, and it's I'll be happy to answer a question on that. And yeah, and then I was told to just throw up my information, so I'll do that quickly if I can figure out PowerPoint again because I haven't used this since high school. Ryan Morrison's my name. I am RyanMorrisonLaw.com. Ryan at RyanMorrisonLaw.com. Twitter is Mr. Ryan Morrison, and I am. You can go to reddit.com/u, I believe it is, video game attorney. And not stealing Tom's trademark, but I go by video game attorney on Reddit. And if you just Google video game attorney, my AMA pops up on there, and you can see my username and follow the weekly submissions. If you're familiar with Reddit and you know how the subreddits work, it's the game developer subreddit is where I do it. It's /GameDev. And yeah, if you follow me on Twitter, I'll always let you know when I'm doing one and try to answer questions that way. And again, I know I'm kind of an idiot for it, but I don't charge for communication. I don't charge for email or phone calls. If you have a question about your game studio, or you have a question about your company, or you want to just ask something that you saw in this video that is, you know, a little confusing to you still, feel free to shoot me an email. Feel to just even throw me something on Twitter, and I'm always happy to go over the basics with you. Obviously, if you need something formally reviewed or drafted, then we need to do the legally ethical attorney-client relationship. But yeah, for now, that's basically going to be it. And how yeah, there we go. Right. So then to talk about a couple other things that are just popular in the game dev industry before I get out of here. I believe we have about 10 minutes left. Tristan, right? I don't know. I can't see the clock. Yeah. So. Yeah, you there?
Oh, yeah. There's about 20 minutes left. If anybody has any additional questions, they can throw them in the question box for you, or you can chatter, or we can end early, whichever works best.
Yeah, I left time open to do some questions, so it's that's why the slides are a bit short. But you know, nothing's popping up quite yet, so I can just answer basically some of the more popular ones that I get, or can end early if you want. It's up to you. And
yeah, go ahead and
I'll basically touch on licensing.
Yeah, go ahead and cover anything else that you think will be useful, and if some questions come in, we can take them.
Sure, yeah. I'll touch on licensing and open source software because I get a lot of questions on that. The answer is, you know, the GPL and the various other licenses that exist, they're not something magic. They don't make your game untouchable. A license is revocable. You can say, yes, my game's under the GPL, and then later say, no, it's not. And as long as it's your intellectual property, you control that license. Yes, there are some open source licenses that are non-revocable, but even then, basically, they're all revocable, depending on what you do. going back to Mojang, which I mentioned earlier, there was an open source project going on, I believe called Bucket, and some people working with Mojang were contributing Minecraft source code to Bucket under the GPL, I believe it was. And everyone started screaming, oh, does this mean Minecraft's open source now? They can't sell it. We can do whatever we want with Minecraft for free. Of course it doesn't mean that. Nothing about any software license or open source license that exists right now is going to take a popular, well-known brand like that and make it accidentally open source and not owned by anybody. It's just not going to happen. So, you know, these licenses are very important because you are agreeing to them. You are letting your stuff out by them, and they vary widely, but it's important to understand that they're really for how your intellectual property is dealt with by people working on it. So if you put your thing under open source, you can probably revoke that at any point you want. The person who can't revoke that is the person who takes it next on GitHub or whatever and dabbles with it and then says, you know, he's not allowed to change that license that you as the rights holder agreed to. That's basically why these licenses have any strength. And again, it's much more complicated than that, but I'm trying to explain it on a basic level. So that's basically it. So I got a couple questions now. So is there anything specific to be aware of if you're using a freelancer off a website like Elance? I have not heard of Elance, but that's actually good to hear of because I'll look into it. But that's going to be on how the process is done. I unfortunately assume Elance doesn't really give you guys a good contract, and if they do, it's very important to make sure that they are knowing where the jurisdiction is, as if, you know, they might be selling the same freelancer work to someone in Europe as they are in America, and we have different intellectual property rights. We have different rules. So it's important to know where the person is you're working with, and it's important to know what agreement you're working under. You know, I would imagine Elance has a terms of service that says, we're just helping you, we're giving you guys each other's email addresses, we have nothing to say with what happens between you, to try to remove all their licensing liability. But, you know, is that going to help you? No, obviously. Is it the safest thing in the world? Probably not. But again, I don't want to knock it or comment it on until I've just heard of it now. So it's possible, it's amazing. It's possible there's a great team of lawyers behind it, but, you know, I would doubt that off the bat. So I would always get, you know, another agreement up there when possible. Thank you, Rob. That's nice. Is there any limitations regarding copyright between Canada and the United States? Does it cross border, or is it necessary to register in America as well? That's an excellent question. There is actually a great Canadian intellectual property attorney I know who I would recommend you reach out to for any of that stuff. The reason being, you know, first and foremost, I'm an American attorney. I'm not too familiar with Canadian law. I know that a lot of Canadian companies, if they're only going to register one place, and of course it's better to register both always. If money's no object, you should register everywhere. But if you're going to do one or the other, it's almost always smarter to do it in America because, you know, we have the App Store here, we have Steam based here. You know, everything is headquartered here for now, fingers crossed. And that's why our trademark system is going to be usually more powerful than anywhere else, and our copyright system is going to be usually more powerful than everyone else. And again, going back to registering copyrights, this is actually very worth saying, is I see bad information on this also too. Copyrights exist immediately, they're free, and you have a copyright on anything you create. That's why people used to say the poor man's copyright would be mailing yourself something or emailing yourself something. So you have a timestamp saying, I created this then. Trademarks also have common law protection, but that does not exist in video games or tech. Trademarks you need to register. Copyrights not so much, or at least less so. You still should. Trademarks, the reason it doesn't work here is because common law rights are regional, meaning if I owned a Domino's pizza down the block from me before the huge Domino's franchise came, when Domino's registers that trademark and they become the Domino's that we all know and maybe love, my Domino's Pizza doesn't have to shut down because I have regional protection in my neighborhood or my state, or depending how big my store is, that I was there first. I have common law protection to it. I can't stop the other Domino's brand, but I'm regionally protected here. That would be great in video games if you could say, well, I've been using this name forever, so this big registered company, can't. Unfortunately, it's not the way it works. If you have a registered trademark and you're kind of first to have the power there, the region here is the internet, or it's the app store. It's the world. So those common law rights disappear very quickly in video games and technology, and it's absolutely something you should concern yourself with. And then circling all the way around back again, it's no matter where you are based in the world, the EU and America are usually the best places to trademark, and then try to go with an international registration after that, because again, we just have most of the stuff based here. Canada's a beautiful place. I love it, but you don't have most of the major companies headquartered there. So something to think about. What scope of games need terms of service privacy policy documents? For example, does this similar in scope to Flappy Bird? So that's a great question. The answer is everything. Every single app, every single game needs a terms of service and needs a privacy policy. I know there are no absolutes in law, but there is no exceptions here. If you have something that you're selling to the public where you're taking an email address or you're tracking any kind of metric, or you're just on the App Store and want to tell everyone you're not tracking anything, you need the privacy policy in terms of service. Even Flappy Bird had the microtransactions, and without those, he made $50,000 a day or whatever it was. He needs the service protecting those purchases, protecting him from disgruntled customers, and et cetera, et cetera. There's never a scenario where you shouldn't get it. I do a jump, not to advertise, but I do a jumpstart package with most new startups where it's a terms of service, privacy policy, independent contractor agreement, and trademark. And I think those are really where you should be starting, just based on the experience I have with indies and mid-level tiers. It's usually exactly where you want to be covered as a new studio, to go from a hobbyist to an actual developer. So again, keep that in mind. What would be a way to know who owns copyrighted material out of a company? So if a company's out of business and you want to use their IP, how do you figure out who owns the rights now? The unfortunate answer is you probably don't. You can get an attorney or someone who might get an answer better than you. Someone like Apple's not going to return your email usually, but their legal department will answer mine. There's a prompt when I call saying, are you an attorney? If not, see you later. But we're allowed to get through. That's pretty much the biggest perk of my license. Will I get a better result though? Probably not. The copyright system is a terrible registry. The trademark system is a lot better, but tracing back all the ownerships, especially of a company that's dead, but before their rights have abandoned, it's really difficult because they probably still have rights to that. Even if their company has dissolved, it would probably transfer to the owner of that company, who might be doing nothing, but then the second your game explodes or the second it does well, you get a letter saying, hey, you're infringing on my IP. Doesn't matter, I wasn't using it. It hasn't been long enough that it's dead. It's mine, and I'm suing you now. So the best answer is do your due diligence. Try to reach out to everyone you can. Try to figure out who does own these things. But if you don't and someone does, it's not like you did enough. You're still liable. So it's unfortunately a dangerous game to not stick to your own intellectual property. Wish I had better news for that. Does everything that you discussed apply internationally? No. Mostly, but I need just, lawyers have a lot of rules they have to follow. Again, if you see those Reddit AMAs, you'll see that I have a disclaimer on every single one of them saying that I'm not only an American attorney, but I'm only in New York. So not even internationally, a lot of what I say might not even apply in New Jersey. Most of it absolutely does, but there's going to be different changes in laws in every country. There's going to be different rules on employment matters in every state. It's just how these things work. There's unfortunately going to be a million different ways to kind of space these things out and say, exactly what's different. But the things that do hold internationally are, I believe you should file a trademark in America. I think you should have a terms of service and privacy policy no matter what. And I think you should have a contract with anyone you're working with, whether they are your partner, whether they are your friend in your dorm room, whether they are an employee or a freelancer. Even though your state or country will have different laws, there is no state or country where contracts don't work, besides maybe a couple of them. But as a rule, have a contract. Don't mess around with that stuff. And that basically brings us full circle. If there's no other questions, I guess I'm going to just kind of teeter off early. But it's been an absolute pleasure, and I'll give you guys another 10 seconds to type something out if you want. And if not, Tristan, we good to go?
Yeah, okay. Well, then I will do a wrap-up while if anybody's typing, give them a chance. So the IGDA hosts Wednesday webinars every week unless something bad TM happens. Next week will be, I believe the second Wednesdays are the artificial intelligence webinars. You can just go to igd.org/webinar to get info on that and register. And if you have any recommendations or ideas for webinars we should host in the future or know of a speaker we should possibly try to snag, after the webinar, I believe tomorrow, it will send out a survey and you can fill it out and throw some info in there. And thank you, Ryan. I don't believe that anybody typed in any questions.
Yeah.
So, all right, thanks everybody. Have a great week.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.